Uh-oh. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Bugs! You can either live with them, or you can be filming a sewing video in your basement one day, suddenly realize there's a cockroach on your shirt, and throw down your camera in a fit of fear, as a result, breaking your kit lens. That is actually how I broke this kit lens. I'm not kidding. We save yogurt cups so that we can use them to catch cockroaches. I have armed myself. They're not getting away with it this time. Do you see what I mean? Do you see that? There it is. You pathetic coward. Seeing as how it's summer and they've all decided to come into my house in the past week, recently I've had bugs on the mind. Sometimes, literally, whenever they fall on my head, whenever I'm walking through my basement. I love living in the southern United States. Specifically, there was one premiere recently where I was in the chat with you guys and you just gave me an absolute treasure trove of ideas, and most of them centered around bugs. And somebody in the chat was like, hey, you should turn some bugs into fairy nights. And you know, that's just in my brain now. So obviously, I have to do it. The bugs we are playing around with today are a monarch butterfly, an orchid mantis, a dragonfly, and a beetle that I don't know the name of off the top of my head. I tried to be pretty intentional with my boards this time around because honestly I've been slacking a little bit, but I was super happy with one of my recent episodes of this. It was the sea creature pirate that actually turned out really good, so I tried to emulate my method there a little bit. And I did that by like mentally starting out with an established lore for these characters. I imagined that they're each part of like a bug knight clan. They all use like a specific kind of weaponry and like maybe fight in a particular style, and then also maybe have a particular kind of armor that they gravitate towards, between like light armor, heavy plate armor, like brigandine, stuff like that. I also very much leaned into the idea of fairy knights and not just knights, because I wanted these to be very much based in fantasy nonsense, as I do. Even starting with my boards, I tried to give each of them a really distinct aesthetic. Dragonfly's aesthetic is a little bit more street fashion with a lot of like iridescent colors and crazy makeup. Mantis is full of soft feminine silhouettes and long flowing hair and pastel colors, since I'm basing this on an orchid mantis. On these boards there is definitely a strong mix between like fantasy aesthetics and traditional European knight core. Some of these have very little practical wear because they're just meant to look really, really pretty, and you know, that's okay. That's kind of what I feel like going for today. But I did put forth a little bit of effort this week because I did begin by creating a little diagram where I broke down the main shapes in all of the bugs, and I picked out basically their key color palette. I also wrote down some traits that I think that they would have if they divided into a little team, which I think even before doing some thumbnails, which is the next step, gives me a nice base to work from so that I know generally what kind of characters I'm going for. So obviously the next step is thumbnails. I went about these in mostly the same way that I normally do. I just want to nail down the silhouette, color palette, and the general design. But I also feel like recently I've been designing too much of these characters and the thumbnails themselves, and it doesn't leave me enough room for exploration whenever I do the actual designs. So I made an intentional decision to get rough designs on here to a point, but actually kind of leave them bad. I wanted some things to obviously improve on so I can actually iterate whenever I do the final designs and not feel too attached to them, which is a good thing because at this point I didn't really like the mantis or the beetle, and oh boy, did the struggling not stop here. At this point I was pretty certain that I liked the dragonfly and monarch butterfly design, but the other two, the mantis and the beetle, I just wasn't entirely feeling, but that's okay. They're kind of just there for me to get something down on paper. That way I just have something visual to work from going into all of this. And speaking of visuals, if you have your own creative visual offerings that need to be displayed somewhere, look no further than this video's sponsor, Squarespace. It's getting harder and harder for me to segue into this in an organic way. No matter what kind of creative you are, Squarespace can help you to build a beautiful and personal online presence and help you to track your analytics as well. They offer dozens of professional and customizable website and portfolio templates for every kind of aesthetic there is. Are you a maximalist like me? They have a ton of visual features to help populate your site, like automatic image scaling, which can help you to quickly fill your portfolio by automatically giving your portfolio pieces an appealing arrangement as soon as they're uploaded. They also have audio, video, and image blocks so that you can customize a ton of different media for your site. And if even that isn't enough, you can drop your whole entire Instagram gallery on there with social blocks that allow you to link your various social medias to your Squarespace site so you can feature recent posts and be more unified across your platforms. But if you like to be a little bit more minimal, let me just walk all of that that back, you can simply choose from one of their beautiful, tasteful templates and polish up the subtle details like text, colors, logos, and your personal brand flair. And that customization also applies to their e-commerce platform because yes, they have one. I use one in tandem with a print-on-demand service because I am way too absent-minded to do all of that myself, and they have super thorough analytics for both your store and site so you can better understand who your audience is and what kind of content interests them the most. So if you would like to create a thriving online presence for your creative business, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/PricklyAlpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's compulsions. Now let's get started. Alright, first up we have the dragonfly, and in many ways we are starting off strong and heading towards suffering and indecision. I don't know why I began with the designs that were giving me the least trouble, but I did. So I mostly liked the direction that Dragonfly's design was going in the thumbnail, so I decided to just keep doing what I was doing. And as you saw from my little diagram, I kind of wanted this character to be the fast, agile, stealthy archetype, so I wanted to give her a very petite frame, long legs, and a fighting style that was kind of swift and stabby, just because that's just the energy that dragonflies give me, you know? So for her, I went for rapier and dagger, which coincidentally is a fight style that I've seen demonstrated in person many times by local HEMA groups at run fairs, and the swift movements and footwork combined with the delicate frame of a rapier I thought was a perfect choice for a dragonfly. So the weapon choices and fight style are pretty rooted in history, but then when we get to the clothing, we get to some fantasy nonsense. I really love the texture on the wings of a butterfly dragonfly. To me, it kind of reminds me of like that very particular kind of leather texture. So because of that, I wanted to give her some leather armor, and for the most part, leather armor is not really based in history, but for the purposes of this video, we don't care. So I gave her a little leather shoulder piece and a matching leather tunic that I would see as like, you know, light armor, something that's not going to keep you from getting impaled, but something that will defend against a couple of slashes. And something about the whole poofy sleeve, poofy pants look just seemed to work well for this character, so I also gave her that. The correct term for the poofy pants that I gave her is trunk hose. I think it also works well for the whole knight silhouette, even though it's not full plate armor, just because in full plate armor you'd probably have some pauldrons and some hip guards. It gives you the same general look. And then because I see dragonflies as being like little skinny, dainty creatures, I also gave her some very tight-fitting leather gloves on her arms and some very, very high, tight-fitting leather boots. Dragonflies are just such long boys that if they were a person, I think that they would be very, very lanky. And because I really wanted to incorporate those beautiful wings somewhere, I mean, these characters are supposed to kind of be fairies, I gave her some wing-shaped tails on the back of her tunic, and then also some little wings as a decorative piece in her hair. And her hair is also a really fun part of this design. I was very inspired by these various hairstyles. Since wings come in sets of 2, I thought that visually it would read really well if she had 2 braids, also high on her head, just to add that little bit of sass, because I feel like that's the kind of character this would be. And of course, another fun part of this prompt was designing weapons that were like insect themed, so I made her rapier and her dagger both look like a dragonfly, and then also have like a little water motif wrapping around because dragonflies are often found near the water. I also added some little water droplets as the pommel. Like, I don't know, I just think the weapon design here came out looking really cute. It's the kind of design that I kind of want to actually make now, especially now that I'm in my sword making era. I don't know, let me know if you'd want to see that because it's pretty sick. For coloration, I stayed pretty close to the reference colors of the butterfly dragonfly, but I did kind of go in with the rendering on this one because getting that dragonfly texture onto the leather was really important for the design. I went in and actually added some like color dodge filters and luminosity to try to get it actually looking iridescent, and I also tried to get the colors as close to the reference as I could. In the end, I think it looks really cute. I'm a really big fan of the color palette in this one. If I were to characterize her in any way, I feel like she would definitely be a moody teen, probably the apprentice of the group, the youngest. As someone who has that dragonfly fighting style, I feel like she would be very fast and agile, which leads her to be a little bit impulsive, but she also has the ability to be very precise, which I feel like would make her a little bit overconfident in her abilities as a young person. And the others in the group would probably be mentoring her and being like, okay, calm down, slow down. We know you're good at what you do, but hey, don't put anyone's life in danger. It's okay to be learning. Because of that, I think her finishing move as a fight style and her speciality would be like pinpoint precision. which also fits very well with like rapiers, right? As she learns to master this ability, I feel like she would mature to be a little bit more calm and stoic. Much like her primary mentor, which I think would be Monarch, who is our next design. Monarch probably came out being my favorite design of the set. Something about the process of designing her, every little decision I made just ended up feeling right, even in the thumbnail. And I basically didn't change a whole lot from the thumbnail, but I did end up making the armor make a lot more sense, which is great. So obviously with Monarch, the wings of a monarch butterfly are one of the most iconic things in nature, so I wanted to feature them prominently in the design. So I basically ended up making like a giant cloak made of monarch butterfly wings, but in a very like structured way. Honestly, I want this in my closet. I feel like this would be such a sleigh to wear in the Walmart. The very structural part of the cloak is like the neck piece and shoulder pieces, which do incorporate some armor, but then it kind of flows down around the arms so that she has some more free movement, especially around her biceps and shoulders, which is important for her because the weapon I ended up giving her is a glaive, which is essentially a long spear with like a huge blade at the end. And I imagine in order to wield that properly, you're gonna need like full range of motion in your arms because you kind of have to like coordinate your elbows and your shoulders, you know? To complement the spear, I also gave her a little hands-free like bracer that has a giant shield on it so that she could still like lift her arm up and protect against little isolated attacks if she needed to. And I also gave her some flexible layered plate armor on her arms so that they wouldn't be completely bare, but so that they would still be able to move with her as she uses her spear. And I also gave her a similar armor aesthetic on her body, basically some layered plate armor to serve as a breastplate so that she can also still move her ribcage and her hips, and some layered plate armor on her hips as well, just to protect that general area, along with some tall greaves in the same style. But for some added drama, I also gave her like a little skirt with a high slit so that, you know, she's still serving. And as an added touch, for the purposes of specifically disappointing Jill Barrett, I also give her some really high stiletto boots. And listen, we're here for the drama with this character design. It's meant to just be dramatic, and it's fine. Just pretend she's really good at fighting with heels. And here's also a fun thought experiment. If she's a fairy and her cape actually works as wings, then she doesn't even need to touch the ground. She doesn't need to be able to walk. It's fine. Anyways, last but not least, while on the subject of drama, I just went all out with the hair. I don't know exactly what inspired this hairstyle. I just somehow found it along the way. It ended up being the silhouette that I liked the best, and I think that it looks super rad. It's like Sailor Moon, but make it more elvish fantasy. I don't know. I love it. It's fantasy nonsense, and I love it. So in terms of coloration, I decided to show some restraint for once and make this extremely straightforward. It's just your basic complementary color palette. I ended up mostly taking the colors from an orange monarch butterfly and then mixing them with the colors of a blue monarch butterfly. I'm fairly certain I'm thinking of an entirely different butterfly, but again, this is fantasy, it doesn't matter. I was actually struggling quite a bit with the colors at first because I was trying to just do like orange and then black, like the colors of a monarch butterfly. But the armor in black was just looking really, really flat, so I ended up adding some shades of blue, and then it was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. And then I ended up also making the weapons blue and have the motif of like a blue butterfly wing, and it just really came together. I love it. I think the lighter dots also really help to balance everything out and add a little bit more detail. And also personally, selfishly, I really need someone to cosplay this just so that I can see it translate to the real world because I feel like it would be so pretty. If anyone watching wants to do that, you have my full blessing and permission. Live your best life. I also completely forgot to mention that I took a stab at designing helmets for these characters, and helmets are not my strong suit at all. It's just a very necessary piece of armor, so I tried, and I think they turned out pretty cool, but I'm not focusing on them here, obviously. In terms of characterization, I mean, do you see her? She has leadership abilities. I feel like she would also be very like tempered and careful and protective, maybe even have some kind of healing spells or medic abilities. As one of the main people training the impulsive youth, I feel like making her a foil to Dragonfly makes a lot of sense. I think she would be pretty strict, intolerant of nonsense, but also fair, giving recognition to good work. I also think it would be really funny if she were an insufferable prankster, just to throw a trait in there that's a little out of pocket to make you say, okay, what exactly is her deal? Maybe it's a trait that's left over from her more rebellious youth because she is more like Dragonfly than she would like to admit. Who knows? Not me. It's not like I'm making her or anything. Also, hear me out, I think she would be really good at baking sourdough bread. Is that because I want sourdough bread at this very minute? You can't prove anything. So Mantis is one of the characters that I was most looking forward to designing, so obviously I put too much pressure on myself to make it look a certain way, and she ended up being pretty difficult. So I think the silhouette of a praying mantis is just so interesting, absolutely gorgeous. Like, what even are these little guys? So I wanted to pull heavily from that silhouette, which is one of the things that ended up making this difficult. I think the design in the thumbnail is pretty good, but it's kind of dry and directionless, so I ended up reworking it a good bit in this version, and I ended up liking it a whole lot better this time around. So a few key elements from a praying mantis's silhouette that I wanted to bring into this design are, first of all, like their big old clunky forearms, their little flower petal knees, their weird bulbous head, and then an orchid mantis specifically also has some little things on it that just make it look like an orchid, little leaves and like flower looking bits. So I wanted to try to incorporate all of that into this design. So on my little bug analysis board, I ended up writing that I wanted this character to have like very swift flowing attacks and then also be a little bit defensive and protective. I figured that very swift slashing attacks would work well for the style, so I ended up giving her a katana. And since she would be doing a lot of close quarters fighting, I also gave her some full plate armor with some chainmail underneath. And I basically decided to bring the sharper shapes of the mantis into the design of the armor, and then the flowier orchid petal shapes of the mantis into the design of the dress that she wears with the armor. Once again, we are acknowledging the impracticality here, and we are simply choosing to ignore it. You guys should know by now that whenever I design characters, I'm basically designing video game characters for like Genshin Impact or Overwatch, or any other game where the priority is just style points. The people who rig the 3D model can make it functional, but we don't have to do that because it's just an illustration and it's not gonna exist. So speaking of impracticality, one of the first decisions, long flowy sleeves. To match that, long flowy skirt that looks like petals that's open in the front. And while we're making this outfit just impossible to move in, I also gave her the longest hair. But that is for a very important reason. I really love the shape of a praying mantis's head, and I was like, how do I get that shape onto a character? And I was like, okay, I can just give her some weird hair buns. And I can also accidentally give her a very similar hairstyle to Monarch because I wasn't paying attention, but it's fine because it looks good. I added some orchid looking flowers at the center of those hair buns to kind of look like the eyes of a praying mantis, and I also gave her a little face piece to look like the antenna. The armor came together in a mix of like, okay, this is believable and practical, and wait a second, this might also impale me. I really like the little spikes that are on a praying mantis's arm, so I basically wanted to add a bunch of spikes onto the armor for that reason. The armor set is more or less a very straightforward, curved set of plate armor, something that feels a little bit feminine while also managing to avoid boot plate, but to accent that and ruin any semblance of practicality, I added spikes onto the pauldrons, the gauntlets, and the greaves as well. I further accented that with different orchid motifs on various areas of the armor, and also one onto the guard of the katana, and I also tried to design a traditional knight helmet into the shape of an orchid mantis's head. I think it works more or less, but then it also looks like that one Pokemon. The color palette for this one is basically a one-to-one translation from an actual orchid mantis, just using various shades of pink and peach as the main colors and accenting that with different shades of green, and adding a little bit of dark burgundy for contrast. In terms of characterization, I think that she would have like a really sweet, gentle side, and then also like a really dangerous side, just to mirror how an orchid mantis looks, because they look really pretty, like an orchid, which I'm sure is a defense mechanism to like camouflage them from predators, but I'm sure it's also really confusing to prey. So I feel like she would be a really nice, sweet person, but like with a really big temper. Like, you don't want to piss her off, but I don't think it's a burning hot temper. I think she has a cold temper, the kind of temper that is vindictive and strategic, and you just don't want to get on her bad side, which also makes her very strategic and calculating in battle, which means she works really well with Monarch and is a great asset to the team. And finally, we have the beetle character, which, like I said, is inspired by two different beetles, just because whenever I was designing it, I thought both were cool, and I was like, you know what, why not? You'll probably notice that this character is very different from the one featured in the thumbnail, and that's because whenever I was doing the coloration, I just felt like it was a little bit too similar to Dragonfly, and I wanted to base it on this beetle instead, just to switch things up a little bit. And I think that was a wise decision, just because I really wasn't feeling the coloration of the other beetle, but that did make my job a lot harder because it kind of changed the entire vibe of the design. The broad strokes of the character are still the same. I mostly just wanted to draw a really big buff lady because whenever I look at a beetle, I'm like, that's probably what you'd look like as a person. So as the resident big buff lady of the group, I thought, you know what? She's gotta be the tank, right? So I wanted to give her some full plate armor and a really big battle axe. And unfortunately, I found those practical decisions to be somewhat limiting when designing this character because it left less room for nonsense and flowing skirts, just given the nature of this character. I basically wanted the vibe of the armor to look like the shell of a beetle, but like in a more abstract way. I also wanted to bring the more intricate parts of a beetle, like the legs and the head of a rhino beetle, to the forefront of the design and focus on those in the armor. So as a buff lady, I put a lot of emphasis on the shoulders and specifically the pauldrons, and I brought the shape of a rhino beetle's head into the top two pauldrons and sort of layered those down her arms. I also wanted to design a cool breastplate for this armor, and I struggled quite a bit with doing that. I couldn't quite decide on an aesthetic just because the back of the beetle is a little bit minimal for me. I wanted to bring those shapes into it, but no clear design popped into my brain along the way. So since I have recently been very fixated on armor corsets, that's sort of what I went with. The design ended up being pretty basic. It's kind of segmented like a beetle, and then it has a couple of motifs that feel a little bit beetle-y, but I don't think it's super special, and it doesn't exactly sell the prompt. Like, it's fine. I did something similar with the leg armor, but I think it looks a little bit better because I tried to at least work the shape of a beetle's wings folding into the overall flow of the design, which once again I think is kind of just okay. Underneath all of the armor, for a bit of extra protection, I gave her a little scale mail dress. That way I could still have a bit of like a boob window, but still have her be a little bit protected up there. And I paired that with some fingerless gloves with spikes on them because beetles are kind of a sharp insect sometimes. And I further accessorized with a little beetle leg headband and of course some beetle wings. While I think that the rest of this design is maybe a little bit stale, the axe is one of my favorite weapons that I designed in this video. It's pretty straightforward. There's just a little beetle in the center, and then the blades have a wing motif, and then the bottom of the axe has like a little beetle leg motif. It's deceptively simple and effective for a weapon design for me, and part of me kind of wants to bring it into the real world. I think it would be cool. So the coloring in this design was definitely the hardest part by far. Something about the coloration of the scarab that I based this design on is just so difficult to achieve without putting a lot of time and effort into it. I tried my darndest for the time that I had, but I also feel like this color scheme is a little bit too much for this much plate armor. If she only had a little bit of armor that had this kind of color scheme, I think that it would have worked a lot better, but this is just like a little bit too busy. There's a lot of bold colors happening all at once, which I actually think would translate a lot better into a real costume rather than like a flat character design. Something about it here just isn't really it for me, which is one reason why I added in a rhino beetle just to get some darker color in there to calm down all of the rainbow effect that's happening. I think I eventually got it to a reasonable point, but whenever I say something is too much for me, a maximalist, you know, hey, like maybe it's a little bit too much, calm down. In terms of personality, this character is definitely the boldest dresser, and I think she would also have the boldest personality. I think she would definitely be the snarky comic relief of the group. We have a group of rather stale insects, and we need someone to balance them out. This character is extroverted, she likes to drink, she likes to have a good time, she loves a good dare. She also loves a good practical joke. She'd probably get along well with Monarch, you know, after she's loosened up with a few drinks. Overall, I really like the vibe of this character. I just wish I liked the design more. And with that, here's the finished designs. Here's a bunch of bugs that I just put in ridiculous outfits. What do you think? Do you like how they look? I like how at least 3 of them look. As always, please let me know your thoughts down below. It also occurred to me after recording most of this that it would make a whole lot more sense if they were like all enemies of each other at first, because they're all different bugs, and you know, some of them are predators for each other. I don't know why they're like getting along, you know? Maybe this is how they eventually end up, but I think an enemies to friends story makes a lot more sense for this group. That being said, leave your fan fictions down below, and also feel free to mess around with the personalities of the characters that I just said, because I feel like those can also be improved on. I really like reading your comments about that sort of thing, and most of the time you guys have better ideas than I do anyways. The personality and story concepts of these characters are just me throwing that al dente pasta at the wall again. Hi there! Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, an extra special thank you goes to my patrons, and especially my executive producers. I also just want to note that we recently broke over 100 patrons, which is like an incredible number, and I am just so insanely thankful for all of your support. I quite literally couldn't do all this like video thing without you guys. That helps me to afford expensive materials like Worbla and buy new lenses whenever I break mine. So you guys are literally the best. Meg Litch, Cat, Dodo, Zyel S, Shaylee, Gray, The Cat's Bark, Alwyn Hayes, Thea Maia, Ruled by Pluto, Agent Sketchy, Wolven_Arts, Corvid Dome, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, In the Galaxy, Enosign, Meeks Hunter, Megan Penland, India Gloom, Hypnos, Refmlings, Katie, Michael Twycross, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, Bobo McFo, Will Schmidt, and Bean the Bread. If you would like to become a patron and gain access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content on my videos, the link will be in the description. Alright, I'm gonna go work on that cursed lamp that's in my basement. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.